Well, I was hired at Bethel full-time. Well, let's start with part-time. I was hired part-time volleyball coach in 2000. In 2000. I had to think for a second. No, I did seasons in 99, 2000, 98, 99, 2000 as a part-time stipend volleyball coach. So while I was finishing up my degree at the U of M, and then went on to be a teaching specialist at the U of M for 2 years, I just helped out here part-time. So head coach was Andrew Paoleo, and I was one of his assistants. In May, I think it was April or May of 2001, he received the head volleyball job at South Dakota State when they were Division II still, and took that job. And so it was a quick search to get turned around for the next season. I think it was maybe likely April that he took the job. And so Dottie Haugen, Judy Mosman, Chris Hester were the people I remember from the search committee. Chris was the women's AD at the time, Judy overseeing athletics in her VP role, and then Dottie Haugen was on in what used to be the health and physical education department, was the department chair, and there would be teaching connected to the job likely, so she was part of that search committee. We had 5 seniors, and so I always say that I think the assistant coach role, that the current players always love the assistant coach, really helped me out, because there's 5 seniors who didn't want a lot to change. They were a pretty talented group, and probably were looking for not a lot of change. I think that really helped me. Just that the seniors on that search committee, I think, had a big voice. So I was hired that spring, and my first season full-time coaching was the fall of 2021. I think at that age, just being in coaching was a surprise to me. I think I always thought I would do something else on the professional side, and volleyball would always be a fun piece. And it surprised me at that time what my favorite part of the day was, and that was coming out here to help coach. I don't know if it would have been that way at every place I would have been, but I enjoyed the women that I worked with so much, and it was my favorite part of the day. So I felt like, why not chase something that is your favorite part of the day and see if you can do it for a living. When I started, the volleyball part of the job was only 1/3 of the full job. And so I filled out 2/3 of a teaching load under our old TEU system, that 24 points. And so it was like 16 points of teaching. So I taught a full interim 4-credit class that was called Behavioral Aspect of Sport. It was psychology, sociology of sport. I taught a load of volleyball activity courses. I taught coaching of volleyball. I taught theory and practice of coaching with Jimmy Miller. We did a team teaching of theory and practice and coaching. And so that was teaching was for sure as much of my day back then as volleyball, or I mean, most times it was more. So that was a big thing at the beginning. I actually had advisees even. So Dottie, as the department chair, gave me advisees. I kind of did that almost a faculty role, without having that status necessarily. And then so when I was hired, we had a women's AD and a men's AD. We had a split department. Dave Klostrike was the men's AD. He had a PhD, so he also taught. And then Chris Hester was the women's AD. She also coached women's basketball. So we had a split department, and Chris was who hired me. 1 year after I was here, Chris was let go. And so we went to a joint department for the first time. I mean, I don't know how long Bethel had the split department. So Dave then became the athletic director over everything, and asked me to take on some of the compliance and eligibility side not too long after this transition. It wasn't immediately, but it was maybe a year or 2 into the transition. So that was a new role for me. So I was learning NCAA, MIAC compliance, Bethel's own eligibility rules. I worked really closely with the registrar. That was my first time beginning to do that. And then when Dave retired and Bob Bjorklund was hired as the full-time athletic director, I moved at that time a little bit more into a true 50-50 role 50% coaching, and then still did some teaching, but more, I was officially, this had happened actually after Chris Hester left. I became the SWA, which is the Senior Woman Administrator in the athletic department. It's a required title that you must have if you're an NCAA institution. It's supposed to be the highest ranking female in the athletic department. And this does say a little about our athletic department, that when I was like 26 and had worked there for a year, I was the SWA, because there just weren't that many. But that role doesn't have specific job duties attached to it. It's a required title that NCAA requires. So as I started working for Bob then later, there were more kind of senior duties attached to that and less teaching. So more, involvement in search committees, more involvement with MIAC representation, NCAA representation, more involvement, and a little bit less teaching. So that was kind of how that role evolved. I think I stopped teaching around 2012 from what I was looking back today. So I think I taught for kind of 11, 12 years, and then the role became, entirely administrative and coaching. Outside of those, like really formal roles, some of the things I've been involved with, much to my dismay, looking back, was a lot of COVID stuff. During COVID, Deb Sullivan, trainer, and I were kind of co-leads on just creating the whole plan for Bethel. What would Bethel propose for that fall of 2020? What would we look like across the board, academically, residence life, special events, everything on campus? And so that was a really heavy spring of working with Deb and a lot of subcommittees. I wrote the final report that went to the trustees for them to vote, or for not trustees, sorry, the cabinet, for them to vote yes or no. This is how we'll move forward for the fall, and then stayed on the COVID team that, and kind of led the athletics, sport, club sports, rec sports, all the classes that might be athletically related. Kind of led that whole team. So that was a part of my, it was official duties eventually, but kind of different kind of role. And other things I've done, I've been a grievance officer on campus, so that was a role I held for a couple of years. So those are kind of, and then I think I was counting for something else the other day. I think I've been on over 20 search committees for mostly in athletics, our coaching and athletic director positions, but I've helped hire people that work in like Title IX, and those would be some of the main ones. Oh, and I've sat on some registrar search committees as well. There's not that many left that are separate. I think the intention is always really good because you're trying to have kind of your own structure of being able to advocate for things that you need and for making sure that there is a voice that's dedicated to, to the women's teams. I think this is how, and this will maybe come through in different parts of the question, but growing up as part of teams, I approach almost everything I do, like I'm a part of a team. And so this team moving forward, what are we doing? And that, it always felt, even in just my 1 year, it was a little adversarial to be like a men's program and a women's program. And even in coaching hires, there were some efficiencies, or maybe efficiency is kind of the right word, but also just teamwork dynamics that you miss out, because if a coaching position opens on the women's side, right now we have a lot of coaches that are doing two genders. So Andrew Rock overseeing both, like the whole part of men's and women's track is very different than how it was when I started. So men's and women's track teams and cross country were taking separate buses. We're choosing different events. They actually didn't always get along very well because coaches had different goals and felt like, maybe with scarce resources, they were being pitted against each other, or they had different ways they wanted to travel and different itineraries. And so then we're taking two buses to different places. And that, I don't know that any of that developed good chemistry in our department or developed a sense of camaraderie that is just how I approach life. So I think it's a better model. I can see why, I can see what the intention is to make sure there's someone who's specifically advocating for groups that maybe haven't always had that. But it felt a little adversarial sometimes, and it felt like we were lacking efficiency in some things, and I don't think at a place like Bethel we can afford to do that. Well, one of the stories I tell people sometimes is like we were used to have to like fight for our slots in admissions. So that was part of this, even the beginning, this adversarial piece where when classes were really full and dorms were full and people were tripled up, and the timing of when certain sports recruits might be coming in is really different. So, I do think boys are different than girls in high school, even, I mean, not every single boy and every single girl, but if we're talking about, kind of the typical like decision-making of 18-year-olds. So it was, we were battling for how many late slots could each team, have with admissions. So if I want to get somebody in after this date, how many slots does volleyball have? How many does football have? How many does hockey have? So that was different. And we haven't been there in a while, but I would say that's probably one of the big differences is as athletics I do not think we saw ourselves as an enrollment driver when I started working here. I think we saw ourselves as having to almost battle with admissions sometimes to get people here that we really wanted. That's a huge change. I do think we're not only us, but we're one of the programs that has to be an enrollment driver. So that relationship is really different, and how we recruit is different, and the pressure you feel to bring in classes of we don't have quotas. We've never had quotas in athletics to bring in a certain number, but I think everybody wants to do their best. And if everybody's saying to themselves, if we could bring in like one more student, if I say no to this student and they go someplace else just because of the athletics piece, like what's my responsibility in that? And also balancing that with what's my responsibility to this level of team that I've said we're going to be. So that's really, really different from when we first started. I think just the other difference for me, and I thought about this a lot when Steve Johnson retired, is I was like the youngster for what I feel like was actually a long time. I feel like I got a good 10-ish years of still being able to like be the youngster. And so I had really, and I know we'll maybe talk about women that were important too, but I had these really great friendships with these men that had been here a lot longer and often had gone to Bethel. So Jeff Westland and Bob Bjorklund and Steve Johnson and Greg Indelkoffer on the baseball side. And we used to have lunch together in the old dining center, which is, where nursing is now, in the Minnesota room, which was this little room off the dish tray area where I think they just stored, like decorations but they would let us go in, and John Weens and Dick Carlson a lot of times would join us, and we would have lunch and just bring our trays in there, and it would be me with all of them. And it was the way I got introduced to Bethel. It was like storytelling, story after story. And so I really felt like they took me under their wing, and those were my friends at work. That's really different now for me because we have a lot of younger coaches hired now. Steve is gone now, Bob is gone now. So I'm like one of the oldest ones left, and just how I go about how my day feels really different. Not in a bad way, but it feels like I feel very responsible for a lot of things and carry the weight of that for a lot of different people versus being kind of the younger one that people took under their wing. So those were the two things I could think of. Our role with admissions has really changed, and just me personally, how my days feels very different. I guess one last point I'd make about that though is Bethel itself There are a lot, obviously there are a lot of changes, but like the core of Bethel, Steve always called it like this great soil we have. Like I see that, and I see that with my son here for sure. Just even and I think there's some specific people that for sure contribute to that, but even as new people have come in and that kind of personality of Bethel has stayed, there are a lot of Christian colleges I would not want to be at, I think. And it is just a place that I really enjoy, like what the soil is here. Well, I'm learning the actual right vocabulary, the pietism and the irenicism. But I do think those two elements, the idea of this is something in my heart. It's not something that, it's not necessarily just like rote spiritual disciplines. And I want to work toward, collaboration and peace and having, we might disagree about things, but doing that in a way that feels not argumentative. Is those things I didn't really realize growing up with my dad being my pastor the whole time, that was the kinds of churches I grew up in, because it's just my dad's church, and you just know what he's doing that. But that is the kinds of churches we grew up in, and so that feels really comfortable. Like this is a personal faith to me to be here, and it means it's important to me, and it means something in my day-to-day life. But there are people who do that differently, and they are also here with me, and so that is, I think, a piece that hasn't changed. And I looked at Christian colleges, and I don't know if Central would be considered one. I mean, I know it's connected to the Reformed Church, but I was intentionally trying not to find a Christian college when I was coming out of high school. And I looked at Bethel, and that's a whole different story. But I told my parents eventually, I'm like, I'm not going to a Christian, what I view as a Christian college. I'm not signing something. I'm not doing something that says, here's what I will do or I won't do. I grew up a pastor's kid shaking everybody's hand at the end of church, and I just don't want to think about that anymore. I want to go where I can just make decisions and do whatever I want. And it's been really interesting to watch my own son be here and choose that on purpose. But at some of the other places we looked at, I think some of the spirit of a little more, I don't know I'm not really coming up with the right word, but a little more dogma, a little more disciplines that necessarily you didn't want to be a part of. I think he rejected some of that, but found Bethel to be a place that felt different in that way. There's a lot of people that from a distance I really admire. This whole mentor-mentee thing, and especially in formal kinds of ways, I feel like just now at this point in my life, I'm kind of starting to grasp what that is and what that could look like. I feel like I'm pretty independent and autonomous, and I just do what I want to do. And so I'm not great at reaching out to other people, but from a distance, there have been so many women at Bethel that I feel like are so talented and hardworking, and a lot of them are gone. But I always, from a distance, Deb Harless just always blew my mind, because whenever I'd get in a meeting with her, she could get the understanding of something we were trying to explain so quickly. It just felt like she could ask the right questions, get to the heart of it, understand what you were asking for, and then, not that you always got it, but figure out a way forward. Pastor Laurel, I just, heard she had volleyball playing daughters too, so we had that in connection. But she was someone, as a preacher, I just thought was so incredibly talented. And from a distance, whenever I was in chapel with her, I just felt like we were really incredibly lucky to have her here. I actually felt that way about Sherry Mortensen as well. I still have my notes from her last sermon at Bethel. She gave this is what I want to give to you, Bethel, when I leave. And I took notes on the back of something, and it's on my, on my bulletin board in my office, because it was so great. So those are some of the people that I think from a distance, but really like in our department, so Dottie Haugen, you know, and I was next door to her office. We were next door neighbors in offices for a handful of years. I've moved offices a few times, but we were next door. And that was like so great because you could hear Dottie through the walls, you know, with whoever she was talking to on the phone or someone in a meeting. Or often she'd just leave her door open. It was fine. But then, you know, she would come around the corner and just like, you know, fly into my office and have something to say. But she was such a great department chair. She went into your classes and, you know, at least once a semester and would take mad notes and give you feedback on here's what you're doing well, here's what surprised me, here's what, you know, I loved about being in your class. I don't know if we've had a department chair do that since, but Dottie was so so specific about that. And so that was really great. Just her energy and, you know, just her energy, her, like the way she was organized. So Dottie was, you know, an amazing person to have in our department. But maybe the people I felt closest to for a number of years, Cindy Young and Laurel Sulak were the administrative assistants that supported athletics and health and physical education. And they were right next to me on the other side. And especially when my kids were little and I was doing the be a mom and work 3 jobs here, you know, at the same time thing, I was in their office. I was in their office so much to just talk about, here's what's going on with the 4-year-old. Like, what do you think about this? And ask them all those things. And it was a little us against the world sometimes with all the men in our department. It'll be like me, Cindy, and Laurel. Like, how do we get them organized with some of the people we work with? And so, you know, they're both retired now, and I don't know if I could, like, they were just some of my best friends I've had here. And I missed, like, when they retired, I missed them so much. So those were some people that come to mind, on the women's side. I don't know if any of them were like mentors in that really formal sense, but like they were people who just, I trusted to give advice about whatever was going on in life. And yeah, they were super close friends. When you get outside outside of Bethel in athletic, get outside of any of your institution in athletics, you go to women's coaches symposiums, which I do, and clinics, it can get very like us against them and very, you know, militant kind of about, we should be asking for this and demanding this and doing more. But when you're here, like for me, when I'm part of the team, what I'm always thinking about is just like, how do we move this whole team forward? And how do we do that without leaving, I don't want to leave anybody behind, but also I don't want this to come at the expense of something great someone else has going on. So I think what can be difficult for me sometimes is I think I might be just like, I'm putting this, I don't know if this is true, but I wonder if like student athletes or colleagues from other schools think like, well, you should be doing more. Like, you're the SWA. Like, if there's not a full-time assistant in this sport on the women's side, like that's your job to like be, you know, pounding the table till we get one, or that's like your job to ask to see the budgets and make sure that it's all equal, or it's your job to be like, why do you not have more women in your department? Like, that's your job. And we have such strong outcomes on the women's side that for me, that gets hard to say, well, something's going wrong because our outcomes are so strong. So I think the hard part is not that I don't ever feel like, well, because you're a women's sport or you're a women's coach, or I've never felt like someone doesn't listen to my opinion or take what I'm saying or doesn't offer me responsibility if I want it or influence if I want it. I think that, but I do wonder if people feel like you should be doing more. And nobody's ever said that, but I wonder sometimes. This was one example. We just got our grad rates report. I do that report with Steph Holm in institutional research. And so it's a 6-year, you're 6 years out. And ours are 2017-18 cohort. And like, I think that I wrote this down because I just wanted to make sure. Women overall at Bethel graduate at a 76 rate, that 6-year grad rate. Women athletes from that cohort, it was 83%. And so you're comparing women athletes to women overall too, so that includes the athletes in the women's overall cohort. So if you wanted to say athletes versus non-athletes, it would be an even bigger gap. It would, because that original cohort also includes the athletes. But that's like a huge, and it's not a bad, 76 isn't bad, like that's a great rate. 83 is an awesome rate of graduation rate for student athletes. And so, that's one example. And the other piece on the women's side is our coaching longevity is kind of off the charts. Like if you look at John Herbricksmeyer, that's 20 plus years. I'm 20 plus years. Brian Carlson, I think, is approaching 15. It seems like we just hired her, but Penny was at 10, Penny 4. Trent Anderson's approaching 15. So part of, not hiring women is, well, nobody's leaving and they're doing a really good job. And so longevity in coaching is also a really big deal. So I think there's lots of ways, in addition to just like how we're finishing in the all sports standing, how many teams we're sending to nationals, how many teams, when we ask them, like report satisfaction with their experience. The very few our transfer rate is so low of women who come here and then leave for somewhere else. So I think from a standpoint of the benefit to Bethel, like those things, just a lot of those speak for, they come here, people are happy, they don't leave, they have good experiences, they graduate at a really high rate with really high GPAs, and then they go off in the world and like with these callings that I think we've prepared them for in addition to the classroom. So I just see the benefit to Bethel is really high. The only thing I would love is for us to maybe have another sport or two. But you have to, whenever we're starting something, I think it has to be done really well and be supported well. And I don't think we're in a spot right now to do that. Yeah, I was trying to think about transitional moments. I feel like on the women's side, there has really been a steady, I would have to say it's like a steady climb towards like more sustained excellence. So when I was in high school looking at Bethel, I had a cousin who was here at the same time. I was, again, not a very good athlete, but I wanted to be part of something good. And I was looking at Bethel, I'm like, it is not good, like as on the volleyball side. And Central, where I ended up, I went to go see them play Luther. And they had these like 2 female coaches on the bench. And it was like, I just not seen volleyball like it. It was electric and the energy was off the charts. And they were so disciplined and so fast at everything they did. And the bench was going crazy and it was so fun to watch. I'm like, well, I don't know if I can ever play for them, but I just want to practice with them. Like, that's what I want to do. And so, sorry, I was losing my track of where I was going with that. Oh, but looking at Bethel at the same time, it was like, that wasn't what I saw when I was watching them play at the time. I'm like, oh, so I was someone who should not have been making an athletic decision for college. And I still did because it was something, that was drawing me there. And so I do think that there's lots of people that make, whether it's, there's lots of other affinities that people can also be making decisions for in college. But I do think college is, athletics is one of those affinity pieces. And so I have just seen since I started, so when I started working with Andrew, 1999, we won the MIAC championship. The regular season championship. We won the playoff championship. It was Bethel's first invitation to the NCAA tournament in women's volleyball. We were sent to UC San Diego, which was Division III at the time, with some Carrie Ritland was a first-team All-American that year. It was Bethel's first-team All-American in volleyball. And we just had some really outstanding players on that team. And Deb Hunter had kind of taken women's basketball to that era like a little bit earlier. But with Andrew, he was just like, this is what, like, we want to win the conference. This is what we want to do. And no one else in women's sports around here was thinking about that at the time. everybody was kind of hoping to like get to playoffs and have winning seasons. But St. Thomas was in the conference then, we had to beat the Tommies to do things like that. And like for me, that was just like, well, yeah, that's what we did at Central. Like I want to do that here. Those are the kinds of things we want to do. And it felt a little lonely in that on the women's side at the beginning. Like football was trying to do that. Men's basketball was, trying to do that. And then it's just been like, and I think it's through the hires. And then Bob was so great at hiring coaches. I think it's his best legacy, Bob Bjorklund. And he was so good at it. And we had a team of people that helped. But slowly through these hires, I feel like we're getting to this point that it's kind of sustained, excellence. And it's Andrew Rocks, and it's, John Herbergsmeyer here 20 years. And it's like, we're hard to get by the Gusties in women's hockey, but it's like Brian Carlson getting a shot, getting to those championship games, not occasionally, but, getting there consistently. And I think that it hasn't been like super transitional moments, but it's been this kind of sustained time. I do think like volleyball's Elite Eight in 2015, it really kind of captured campus, even from a distance. We had faculty telling us they were watching it, in their classroom, and they like packed out the CC 313 and student activities, had video watching it. That we really felt it. We felt it from a distance, that people were like into this and rooting for us in a way that maybe only football had been able to do before that. So that felt big. Softball last year, like that felt the same way. That felt really like, especially when we got to host the regional, and your 14 inning game with WashU, and then you have to come back and win the next one. And it was hours long, and watching those women just like got that out. Like I'm getting goosebumps as I'm just talking about it, like watching them, that was huge. Going back a little earlier, like Marie Borner, was 2010, was like a multiple time national champion. The track and field female athlete of the year. We'd never had anything like that. That was kind of, it was before Andrew, but that was kind of, that helped get going some things in track. And then Annika Halverson was a NCAA Woman of the Year top 30 finalists, I think 2018 maybe. So those are some of like the big like touchstone moments that I feel like campus got, like campus people who maybe like weren't necessarily interested in softball or women's cross country or whatever, got like rallied around a little. And those pieces have kind of, I think, helped keep us moving forward. And now it feels like everybody is like vying for playoffs. Like we want to be there, and then you see what happens. I still feel like, so I grew up getting to play things, but I got to play things with people who didn't necessarily want to be coaching that thing. So I would have, the volleyball coach would be someone who really wanted to be the boys basketball coach, but he was the new hire in the school district, and so he got volleyball until he proved himself. So I had people who sat in the bleachers and watched us serve for 30 minutes and like talked to their friends, and like never went to a coaching clinic or learned how to do anything. So that's why this college piece was so attractive to me, that I was like, I just want to practice with you. You all look like you know what you're doing, and someone's telling you how to do it, right? And I just really want that. So I think for coaches, like Gen X coaches like me, that was our experience a little bit. And so we really don't take for granted, like what they have. But I think our athletes have had so much formal training from so many people that they are a little like, it's, you have to be really intentional about how you talk to them so that they understand that you might not want to be coached because you've been coached so much your whole life. And so we just have to come to an agreement about how this is going to look like for us, because I'm so much wanting to give you all this information that I never had, but you've been like coached, for way more than I've been. And so we have to come to agreement about how that looks and what that looks, how we work together. So I would say there's so many great things about Title IX, obviously all the opportunities, and it's such interesting conversations going on with the whole women's basketball world right now. And like, do we want to look like men's sports or do we not? Or do we want all this attention or do we not? So that's all really interesting. But I think that one of the big things that we have to understand with athletes coming up is that they have had a totally different experience. And now, and for some of them, like that means burnout. That means like not healthy. That means some toxic environments that they're coming out of, which I can't even imagine, because we're just hoping someone would teach us some techniques sometimes. I'm like one of the most, I'm really independent. I don't really need to feel like, I don't really need to feel like I have like a huge group of friends helping me do something, or like I get really focused on like, this is what I'm doing and here we go. So I think that's true for me at Bethel or out in the world or whatever. So I have to really kind of think about this. I do think in women's coaching circles, there can be this like us against them mentality that feels really adversarial, that I try not to bring in here to Bethel, and that I think our department, it's an interesting thing about, I think our department is kind of very into this, like we're a team and how do we move forward together. It is funny when we have conversations about faculty, because I think that coaches don't understand that faculty, like how faculty move up through the world and how is all based on like, it's all based on having to prove yourself and then having someone try and like tear all that apart. And that's part of what makes the scholarship great. But it is kind of a nitpicking, like you're trying to find flaws with things. And that's how you move through the world. Whereas athletics is like, how do we like all do this together? So I like that resonates with me. So when I'm in other settings out, in like women's sports world, I always approach it that way too. I just always feel like I don't care what you're doing well. Like I don't care if you're doing well. Like I don't want you to not be doing well. Even if you're our rival. I have really close friends from the MIAC, and some people will say to me that they think that's strange, but we're trying to beat each other, but we have really close friendships. I want all of their student athletes to have a great experience. I don't want any student athlete to have a toxic experience or a sad experience anywhere, because sports have just such an ability, to bring people together, to develop skills in you that you maybe don't develop other places. So I really want experience to be great for everyone. And I think that is a little different than, how a lot of stuff in women's sports feels, where it feels a little like us against them. And then back to, I think like, I don't know that I chose it intentionally at the time. I didn't know like theologically I was going to be so aligned with where Bethel is. So even as we like choose churches for our family or choose like faith groups that we want to be a part of, I'm really particular about like, we have to have alignment. Like we have to have alignment to give our time to this thing or to give our whatever. And so that's one piece that I was like, didn't understand that I would be so aligned with where Bethel is when I took the job, because I didn't really do any homework or didn't really know. My dad, this is a side story, but my dad and Jay Barnes went to Wheaton Christian Grammar School together for a little while and were on the wrestling team together. So when I was in my interview, we like talked some about that and some things like that. And Jay, we didn't really talk theology very much. We were talking about some things like that. So I really value my experience as a woman at Bethel for a lot of the alignment that I have with like what Bethel is as an institution, and then how our department has approached, how our department approaches wanting to contribute to the mission of Bethel. I think the only other thing that I would just want to like have recorded is the women that I have worked with on my team, especially now that we are 20 whatever years out, and they are, they have kids going off to college now, some of them, and just watching them from a distance, whether it's on Facebook or Instagram, or I get to see them because my husband runs a volleyball league out in Plymouth, and an alum, and there's 2 alums and their kids he's like, well, Katie and Liz were at Summer League tonight with Finley and Nora, and being a part of their lives has just been a huge privilege of mine. It is, I think, remarkable what so many of them are doing out in the world. I'm really, really proud of them. And I think going back to why would I do this way back when, it was, well, that's the favorite part of my day. And it still remains. Like when I see them, when I walk in the gym, everything else kind of just goes, like all the stupid eligibility or whatever policy that changed, and I see them and I love being in the gym with them. I love how hard they work. I love how smart they are and the questions they ask. So that has just been a really huge privilege, and I love having volleyball be a tool that we get to do that with. So yeah, I think that's it. We feel so embedded here. I mean, like I said, our boys went to the Child Development Center when it existed. I was like single, had, straight out of grad school, and I started, and now we have, now I have a son here who loves it and who was deeply impacted by his freshman experience in so many ways. That I want Bethel to last forever. I do think that it's a place that changes people. And I think you have to do things really well for that to happen. And so I'm just really hopeful that the people that we are really good stewards with everything that we have, so that the people who need to find us can find us, and that there will be lots of generations of grads. My parents went to King's College in New York when it was in, not where it is now, but it was in a different part of New York, and it closed for a long time. It's reopened, I think, in Manhattan maybe, but they lost their, they weren't alums of anywhere for a long time, that it was all closed. And we're hearing Eastern Nazarene and Clark Summit, and my mom's like, yeah, they were in our athletic conference when I was at King's, and under a different name for Clark Summit. But she's like, I think all that's left, is Gordon and Messiah from our conference. So that was a strange experience for them to be we don't have Kings anymore. And so I hope for lots of generations that Bethel is a place that people come, and they come to this good soil, and they can be people who are sure about who they are or who are unsure, and that come out, really being impacted and changed. And yeah, for what's the phrase for, I should know it, for our neighbors, what is it? Our neighbor's good, and tell me the phrase. God's glory and our neighbor's good. Yeah. Thank you.